Hello, and welcome to Connect, Engage, Collaborate, a podcast brought to you by the Tempe Police Department. And I'm your host, Patricia Ramirez. Today, I'm joined by a panel of guests. And can you please start off by introducing yourself?
Yes, I'm Lieutenant Raj Johnson. I've been with the police department for 20 years, currently assigned to Central Bureau Downtown, which is our downtown district in Tempe.
And can you share a little bit about how long have you been with the police department and a little bit of your own story, please?
All right, yeah, sure. So been with the police department for 20 years and been assigned to various assignments from patrol division, field ops, to our downtown bicycle team. I was undercover for about 6 years. And then SWAT team and so forth. And so it's been a really good career. The reason why my path into law enforcement actually started with my mom. And I knew that my mom wanted to be a police officer. And when I asked her, hey, so what happened? Why didn't you become a police officer? Is because she was a woman, and she was a woman of color, and she didn't feel like she had that support, to do this job. And so that always stuck with me of like kind of carrying that mantle, for my mom and just, moving it forward. And then it was also a combination of the DARE program. And as I was like in the fourth grade, a police officer came in uniform and he was in his Class B and everything was crisp. The pleats in his pants would probably cut butter. They were that good. And he had all his medals on, and he talked about what he did. And he talked about how he, is in this profession to help people. And so that resonated with me. And I was like, that's what I want to do. My superhero character is Superman. So I kind of, was like, yes, that allows me to live out this dream of being Superman as a young kid. And so that's kind of how I found my way, path into law enforcement.
Oh, that's awesome. Can you, do you mind sharing, was your mom present at your graduation in the academy?
She was. She was present at the academy, and my father was, and my wife was, and they know that this is the reason why I wanted to be a police officer. And so what was cool about this for me and this story is that when I started as a police officer, it wasn't so good. Like, you get disciplined for memos, right? You get memos for like, showing up late or your paper wasn't, written correctly. And so I just had like a rougher start. And so I was that recruit that at one point, I didn't think I was going to make it. I was given a task to I had to rewrite like 5 papers and a short turnaround time. And so as I progressed through the academy, my RTO and class sergeant, saw the shift and they saw the change about the midpoint of being in academy. And so they didn't say anything. But it was like the last week, when you graduate the academy and they start giving out the assignments. Well, I was the guide on post. And that was my job that they tasked me because of this change. And so to be able to do that for my mom and for her to, watch me carry our class flag was a huge honor. And I could, see that, that honor on her from a distance. It was pretty cool.
And have you ever spoken to her today in terms of the change in law enforcement in women and women of color and how that is so different today, that she wouldn't have been limited? And have you ever had that discussion with her?
We haven't had like that a real detailed discussion about it. She when we talk about it, she says, Roger, I'm so proud of you. And it's such an enduring space and how she says that and how she delivers that. And I hear it from time to time. It's not all the time, right? And it's so cool, right? And but when she says it, it's like, it's just a stop in reality, a stop in time, and there's that instant connection. And I like to think because of that, I'm a strong component of women in law enforcement, women in color in law enforcement, and I feel as from that perspective, I am a, feminist in that, just hey, more, women are needed in this profession, more women of color and just women in general, right, are just needed in this profession. So anytime I have that opportunity to lift, support, encourage, whatever that might look like, that's what I'm charged to do.
Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
Yep. And Sergeant Hernandez.
Good morning. My name is Erik Hernandez. I'm a sergeant with Tempe Police Department. I've been a police officer for 14 years now. I've had a variety of assignments as an officer. I was a negotiator. I was on the negotiations team. I was also in our criminal investigations bureau with you, Trish, and special victims unit. I had a great time there. As a supervisor, I've had the distinct privilege of supervising our gang unit, multiple patrol squads, and currently I'm over Professional Standards Bureau, where I work with you again, Trish, in IA. So it's a position I never thought I'd be in. But being there, there's a lot of good things that could be done, like you've been doing, and just being a part of that team was just fantastic. A lot of points that Raj made are fantastic. I want to go back. I'm a huge comic book fan, as people know me. Superman is my character too. So when I joined this profession,
and I'm Wonder Woman.
Oh yeah, yes you are. That's right.
I'm Wonder Woman.
But that Superman character like resonated with me when I was little, when I was young, and with my family, I have a history of military service, and I wanted to kind of do the same thing and just have that sense of duty and honor. And as a little kid, I looked up to Superman all the time because he had all the ideals that my family and I believed in. So very, very cool that you mentioned that, LT. And then also I'm a father of 3 daughters, big time proponent of women in our profession. We need more women in our profession. And in the past, this was a predominantly male dominated profession. It could still be said that it is, but we need good women over here. And I know that I love the day and age that we're living now, where my daughters can be like open, and then they could be completely not subject to the things that were done in the past. And it's a great future for them. So,
and that could be professional staff, or
mm-hmm.
sworn.
Absolutely,
wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. Our professional staff is fantastic here in Tempe. Our dispatchers, our records department, you name it, we have good people here. So yeah, very, very blessed to be in this department, working with Raj. And just Raj and I go way back. Like, I consider him a friend and a mentor of mine. So sitting here with him is super cool. And I'm looking forward to this interview.
Thank you both. I'm going to ask this next question and just leave it to the two of you. If you can, please tell me, how is a relationship of trust being built between the police department and communities of color?
You want to start, LT?
Yeah, go right ahead.
I think we're doing great strides right now. Like I would say it was good when I joined as a Hispanic officer 14 years ago. I had a lot of opportunities for growth here. And I think now it's even more so, but not just within the department, but outside our department also. Like, our department has so many programs going up right now that assist the communities of color, and diversity is huge. I mean, we have Chief Glover as our chief right now, first African-American chief in Tempe's history. That's key. That's vital. And the lieutenant and I are big and Noble. Raj mentioned he didn't mention he's the president of Noble, our Arizona chapter, and I'm fortunate to be the vice president working with him. And there's so many programs that we have, so many ideas in our brain right now, what we could do to even bridge this community and build it better together. And it's just like, I think we're just kind of tiring ourselves out by listening to each other with the ideas that we have. Yeah. But there's a bright future in our city, in our department. And
how does the community receive that? So in terms of diversity, and tell me, have you had any feedback from the community?
From my own personal experience, absolutely. As being a Hispanic officer, I'm able to interact with the Hispanic community. We have a very big Hispanic community here in Tempe, especially our northeast portion of our city, on Baseline as well. Our Hispanic population is growing, and I speak Spanish, and I'm able to interact with people that come from other countries here. And for them, it's a positive interaction with police that they may not have in their own countries. So it's been very successful for me in bridging that community and having that trust in the police. So it's been I would say it's been really good, and the feedback from the community is really good as well, because our Tempe, our city is just fantastic when it comes to that. Our department is, I would say, second to none here in the Valley when it comes to that. So I think we did a great job.
I would just echo that. And I mean, I think that was just like well said. And just like when we were talking about diversity and you know, and as you mentioned, you know, Erik was on the gang squad as a sergeant, you know, with that. I was about to say E. I'm so used to saying
Right.
E. But like, I just think that's important because like he, from his childhood and his experience in dealing with, just interacting with individuals that for many reasons that may be associated with a gang, and just to be able to have like, hey, that connection, I think is really important. And then he spoke about speaking Spanish, and I'm like, dude, that's is part of our diversity of connecting with people through language, and having that, at our department, and having, E at our department, and just, leading the way in that space, I think is really important. And I think something like to remember, like, why is this important? Diversity and building trust and regaining trust with the community is because of just, we talk about just the history of law enforcement and just kind of like where we've come from. Like more time than ever, we have to be engaged in the space of, gaining trust, regaining the trust, and just changing that aspect of policing where people feel that when they call on our police department, they're going to be treated fairly. There will be procedural justice. That we will do all the steps that it would take to solve that crime, or to aid that victim with resources. But policing hasn't always been pretty.
Can we talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think for law enforcement to move forward, we just really have to take this pause and say, okay, how is policing in its inception in America? How was it brought out? And for policing in America, it really was brought out through slave patrols. And that was the start of it, and as much as that is really hard to say, like, just wait, hold on, you're talking about a noble profession, and you're talking about people who were carrying it, to go out. But we do have this past, and from that slave patrols, which was, a part about bringing about the slaves that ran away from their plantation, and then just moving forward out of slavery and then going into Jim Crow era. Right. And I think that's really important to note, because Jim Crow era, which are the black codes, or laws, or unwritten laws, or some written laws that govern how minorities, very clear to say minorities, because as much as it was true for Black Americans, it was also true for Hispanic Americans and Native Americans and so forth, that said how we're going to live life, and what we could say, what we cannot say, where we can be and where we cannot be. And one of the biggest things that we know of that are sundown towns. And sundown towns are cities that when it came to like 5 o'clock, when the sun was going down, you could not be in that town. Well, who enforced that? It was law enforcement.
Law enforcement.
When somebody was upset because a person of color was walking on a sidewalk and looked at a white person in the eyes, who reported that? A person reports that, reports that to the police, and hey, you can't do that, or hey, you can't be in this store, or hey, which was unfortunately prominent in the South. Acknowledging a white woman, black person acknowledging a white woman, black male, white woman. And that got people killed and lynched. And so the policing was just unfortunately just involved in that, or by the silence encouraged it. And so, and that went through the 60s, unfortunately, and, it went through, the 70s and so forth. And so I think that we still have to get through that, right? And we think we're in the 21st century.
Yes.
We still have to get through that.
We have to have those hard talks.
Right.
And we have to address.
Right.
And I will say personally, when I learned the history of law enforcement and coming from slavery, that hurt my heart.
Absolutely.
It hurt. It was a little bit of a shock to me personally. And yet we have to address history and to make sure that we grow and we learn. But I would tell you, as a Latina, that was hard to hear. And yet I'm very glad that you've shared that.
Yeah, and I share that same sentiment, Trish. When I joined this profession, that did not come to mind, because you're not taught that. This is a noble profession, which it is, but we need to know the history of how this profession came to be. And the way to get past everything is to know the past. So I completely agree with what you just said. Yeah.
And so going with the past, where are we in the future? What are ways that Tempe Police has addressed that, has had those difficult talks, and as we should continue to have these difficult talks? But do you mind touching on how have we as a department really addressed the issue?
Yeah. I feel like we are moving faster than most organizations out there.
I agree.
For sure. And even in the Valley, because we actually started having these conversations prior back, and maybe I could think of maybe 2004, 2005 with just how to communicate with people from different cultures. And then that led into, and actually was led by, believe it or not, Chief Glover and Andre Anderson, Chief Anderson. And I think it was maybe a course of tactical communication, something like that. And they collaborated together and brought that, to our department. And then we had a little bit of space, and then we had more implicit bias training that was done several times. And that was just really good, just getting people, used to this language and used to this understanding and awareness. Most recently, Chief Glover and Tempe Police Department took it to a different level, and that was through Telos. I think that was one of the most profound trips that changed me, and it came at a right time for me.
Can you explain what is Telos?
Sure. Telos is a peacemaking organization that are designed to create peacemakers. And we are peacemakers in law enforcement, but to take a look at being a peacemaker and a peacekeeper, and how do we go by doing that, and what do we know of ourselves as a community to help bring about that passion and empathy to use that and bring people together. And so Tempe Police Department partnered with Telos and did what we call a Southern Pilgrimage trip, which was in the South. And E went on this trip just here recently back in September.
Yes, sir.
It was absolutely amazing. So we went from learning, as we talked about the history, right? And so we went into Louisiana was our first location, and we actually went and visit and started to understand about the Black American experience in America from the inception of slavery. And we started understanding that by going to the Whitney plantation and actually going through up close. So you can't run from it. This is what slaves experienced in America when they were brought over, from the slave ships and from Africa. And we spoke with people in the community. We spoke with people that had experiences, with plantations or descendants from that. And then from there, we went to Mississippi.
Yep.
We went to Mississippi. We met with Medgar Evers' daughter, Renee Evers, which you would love her. You would just love her. I'm going to tell you that. And we heard from her experience of from slavery up into the 60s of what it was like living in Jim Crow. And her father, who was a civil rights activist, was murdered when she was a young child in their driveway. And to hear that experience, the civil rights, and then we ended up in Alabama, Selma, Alabama. And we met with peaceful, nonviolent activists who, again, just explained what the experience has been like in America for Black people, and had conversations about redlining and things like this. But it was a really good experience. It changed me. And just from a quick note, I had struggled too, just from being Black in law enforcement and just really going back and knowing okay, well, where did law enforcement come from? Oh, it came from that. Why am I in this, right? So I had to work through that. It wasn't until I was on this trip and Renee Evers she was talking, we were in a museum, and she said, you know what? I appreciate you, law enforcement. She's like, I did not before because I knew what I grew up. And she was down at the DC on a memorial. She said when she was a young child, or just younger, excuse me. And she said she was afraid being into this march, in this memorial march. She said it was a Black officer that was in a mounted unit, that was a horse that leaned out from his horse and said, "You're going to be safe. You're okay." And when she said that changed her, and it changed me in that moment of just hey, well, I'm in this profession. So.
No, yeah, that trip is just completely eye-opening. So for a little bit, I was born in Southern California, born and raised in Southern California. I moved over here to the Phoenix Valley metro area. metropolitan areas, you have cultures and ethnicities of all kinds here. And you read about the Deep South. You read about these stories. When you go to the Deep South, there's nothing, you have to witness it firsthand. And everything that happened there that's still going on there, that was very eye-opening for me. In school, you don't get taught about Medgar Evers or Emmett Till, and you see it firsthand, and it's eye-opening that this was 60 years ago. And I want to bring it back, and the thing that got me out of this trip, the one thing that I'll never forget, is in Selma, Alabama, and there was an all-Confederate cemetery in the heart of Selma, Alabama, 80% African-American population, and you have a Confederate cemetery in the middle in 2022. But to kind of paint a picture, someone had recently placed Confederate flags in all these graves, and they're brand new. You have the Confederate flags just flapping in the wind. Majestic sight. But when you look at what that flag symbolizes and in this day and age, can you put that in a city where 80% are African-American? And the one thing, and I'll just end it on this, is when they have the flagpole, they have a statue of a Confederate soldier as a memorial of a Confederate soldier. Beautiful statue. You have two flags. You have the Dixie flag and you have the Confederate States of America flag, but there's no United States of America flag. Insane in the 21st century in 2022. That painted a picture of what the Deep South really is. And in order for us as a profession to get past that, we need to know the history. And if people visit our state and our city from the South, there's a reason why there's a distrust in police. And we have to understand that. And it's very eye-opening. It's something you can read, but if you see it, it's just, it's powerful, very powerful.
I'm going to ask you to be a little vulnerable with us. And I'm sure on that drive and in that visit, you had some quiet time. Mm-hmm. You probably had some minutes to reflect back. And can you share what that felt like for you and bringing it forward to, did you tell yourself that this was going to have an impact on you and law enforcement and what you would bring back to our city? Did you share any experience? Can you share an experience such as that?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I have been telling people, I took pictures everywhere of that. Just that cemetery alone will paint a picture of what we're dealing with as a profession in our past, and what the people that from that area come over here, what they experience and what they see when they see us. But yeah, it's you don't think about it until you see it. And for me, I don't know what the feeling I felt. There was very strong emotions. There was anger. There was just hopefulness, really. It's weird, hopefulness. Because I will say this, 80% African-American population in Selma, Alabama, an all-Confederate cemetery, and there's no vandalism whatsoever. No flags are kicked over. No, there's nothing, no vandalism at all. And that right there shows the hope of the human spirit that, yeah, this is a thing of the past, but we're not gonna let this define us who we are now. Mm-hmm. We're not gonna acknowledge it. We're just gonna leave it there. Mm-hmm. People can do their thing. But I mean, it's very eye-opening. So I did feel vulnerable. And and you do have reflection time after because Raj knows this trip takes a lot out of you. And like it opens up your mind to things you have not experienced or even seen before. So yeah, those probably 6 hours of sleep in the hotel rooms are much needed, but you wake up like exhausted the next day.
A lot to take in. It's a lot to take in. It's a lot to take in. And you're sitting in a leadership position with the Tempe Police Department. What do you hope to share with that or gain, or what's the change in you in terms of that experience and how it affects your leadership role?
That's a great question. So we have fantastic people, men and women here in the Tempe Police Department. Our officers are just phenomenal. Not an ounce of racism in any of them. So they don't understand this. Like, I'm not racist. Why are we being taught TPM? Why are we being taught this stuff? But it's not until you realize that this happened in the past. You may not have experienced it. That does not mean other people have not experienced it, especially in the South. And like, they experience this every day. So I would say this, like, have an open mind when I tell my people, when I show them the photos, and don't change who you are. Don't change your style of policing, but know that when you talk to somebody, maybe from Alabama, maybe from Selma, there's a reason why there's a distrust in you, and we shouldn't be taking it personally. It's just the history of what this badge symbolizes to those people there when they come here. And I would say that just keep an open mind and understand that you may not be racist, but that doesn't mean it's not happening somewhere else.
Excellent.
Or these
Thank you for that.
experiences, like, you know, from law enforcement, because it drastically changes once you start moving from Arizona back, you know, to the south and just to the east and a little bit to the north. And I was going to ask you, so what did you think about the bridge, the iconic bridge that
Edmund Pettus Bridge? Oh, yes. Amazing. That was amazing.
What about he's named after?
Who it was named after.
Yeah, go ahead, man.
My God. So I didn't know anything about the Edmund Pettus Bridge. Okay. And I will say the people who are listening to this, look up Edmund Pettus, all right? And look at the bridge that, like, when MLK marched with the people there. It's just that itself is like almost a symbol. Like, we walk over this bridge named after a hateful person, but we're going to have nothing but love and peace come out of it. It was very eye-opening. It was very emotional when we walked that bridge, my group and I. There was 15 of us. And then we all got goosebumps. And we're like, the history happened here. And the fact that that peaceful and loving history happened after a bridge named after a hateful man is phenomenal. It's very ironic.
Klan Grand Wizard for the Ku Klux Klan.
Yeah.
It's still there today.
Yeah.
And you can't change it because law prohibits you from changing that. And so, which is weird. People of color, people that are traveling on that bridge, you know, is traveling under someone that ordained, supported, wanted it, you know, segregation, the lynchings that were going on, the atrocities, the crimes that were going on, and that name is still honored on a bridge.
But what I think, which is awesome, is they kind of turned it around. Yeah. People don't know Edmund Pettus anymore. They know the Edmund Pettus Bridge and the good that happened there. So I think, in a way, history was ironic and turned it into good, you know? But yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy. Yeah.
And so, Lieutenant Johnson, what did you, in terms of your leadership experiencing the Telos process, what would you say, what did you bring back or hope to share with your employees and with the city of Tempe and the community? Because what we do affects our community.
Yeah, you know, I just what Erik said, is just like pushing people just to like this open mind, you know, of like what people experience has been in the past. And, you know, just that trip, and like Erik was talking about, like, why is it so exhausting? Because you're walking through trauma, you know, you're walking through trauma, you're walking through some sadness, you're walking through hate, anger, you're walking through so much. And you know, it's hard to process. And because we haven't Erik and I haven't spoke about the museum, which I don't talk about the museum, the EJI, Equal Justice Institute Museum, and the Lynching Memorial that's in Montgomery, Alabama, because you're going to go, and I don't want to take away that from you and that experience. But I'll just say, like, so thousands of people were lynched, and when they were lynched, it was from like things like drinking from a well, you know, whistling at a white person. I can't tell you how many signs that I saw that was just for drinking out of the well on the wrong side of town. And so, we go through that. And, but as Erik was talking about, like, this hope factor, he's so right, because I saw like a community come together when Rosa Parks got on this bus and she refused to get up that seat. And when that kicked off the bus boycott, and you heard the stories about how the community came together, you know, and said, we're not going to get on the bus. And I didn't know this until I was there. And we're talking about walking 8 miles round trip, you know, for women who are still having to go into the homes as they were the help, you know, and they're in heels, right? and they had hearses, they've had other people's cars, they understood whose kids was going where, and they came and they did that for over a year, you know, which is crazy. And so it's powerful. And so what I bring back from a leadership standpoint is to really just kind of walk a little closer with my employees and be vulnerable, like you had mentioned, Trish, and and then also be approachable where we can have these conversations. And when I'm sharing my trip to, and when I know I have the interest, and just really kind of go in and just explain, hey, this is what I saw, and just kind of open the eyes, and then point people to different books so that they can, start their own journey. But the big thing that from this trip, that from what other people have taken, was just like this compassion and this empathy, like Erik was talking about, like when you're interacting with people in the community and they have this distrust for law enforcement, just understand like where that might come from, and that might be valid because it ain't a perfect profession, and there's all these biases and confirmation biases, and now there's anger, and why people might be angry with this profession, and just kind of understand that. So that helps you really, right? Because it kind of separates it. You know what I mean? So
I am so glad you experienced that. When I heard about it, I so wanted to be a part of that process as well. I like that you said to encourage people to start a journey and to start addressing that and having these very difficult conversations. So you mentioned Noble, and could you elaborate on Noble and the organization, please?
Sure. Noble is the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives. Noble was started in 1976, and it's a great organization. I am the chapter president of Arizona, the Doge Nelson chapter, and Noble is a big organization where we pride ourselves on being a conscious of law enforcement by justice by action. And let me tell you how Noble came about. Noble came about back in the day. I say back in the day, but it's pre 1976. There was still segregation going on within law enforcement itself, right? And so for Black leadership or people who were aspiring to promote and throughout the police department, it was a struggle. It was a huge struggle to do that. Mentoring, to have someone appropriately mentor you, was a huge struggle. And so Noble, it came together and formed, with that in mind. That, hey, it's going to serve as a group to provide a mentorship for those who are seeking to promote within the ranks, further educate themselves in their current position, and also help move their organization forward. And, that comes out to ensuring that, hey, that we are providing proper service to our community that's equitable, right? And so some of the stuff that Noble is involved in is meeting with legislatures. And we're proud to say, first of all, I wanted to say Erik Hernandez is a vice president of Arizona chapter of Noble, and he's just absolutely outstanding. We're fortunate to have our chief, Jeffrey Glover, is the second Noble National VP. And he won that back in, or was elected, back in July, just at our past conference. And so what that means is that he'll naturally ascend to become Noble National president, which is super huge because he has voice with leadership across the country, across the world, and voice, in the White House, right? I believe our past president was at the White House 6 times, and you're part of these discussion that affects law enforcement across the nation. So it's really a big deal. Assistant Chief Andre Anderson is our chapter advisor. Let me tell you what, I mean, he's awesome as that even from me and Erik. I mean, that's why he's fortunate to be in these positions, to have someone like Assistant Chief Anderson who has so much experience with Noble. He served as regional vice president and has been a part of many committees with Noble for many years. And so to have his level of experience here with our chapter and then with our region is really important.
So how could a person be a member? Is it open to ethnicity, or and I'm saying this for someone who may not be watching us to see us, but a listener. So could you walk us through the openness of membership and how to come about that?
Anybody can be a part of it. In fact, our assistant chief, Kathy Master, is actually a member of Noble, and she sits on our curriculum board. We have had past members that are white that are part of it, Hispanics that are a part of it. And so you would just go on to our Noble National website. And you can also go on our aznoble.com and you can register as just with our local chapter, which we hope you do that. If not, you can become a member through the national chapter. Noble is really inclusive, man. We were here to help anyone. In fact, what we've been working on here recently is symposiums, and we've partnered with Sandra Day O'Connor Academy for Justice, their law school here at ASU, Arizona State University. And so our first symposium we had, I believe that was back in August, and that centered around homelessness and the call to end homelessness. And we had expert panels from around the country come in and speak about homelessness and provide different viewpoints on what's working, what's not working. How can the police department become better with that? We had really good attendance. We just finished our second symposium, and that was done last week. Yep. And that symposium was about mental health.
Yep.
And how can we take a look at the mental health in our state and across America, again, with experts. And how do we do that as a police department? And so actually Sergeant Rob Ferrara was present on that panel. He's very big in, the peer support aspect, but also just the mental health. And that was a big tie into Narcan. We were on a meeting today talking about our youth empowerment, right,
Yes,
Eric?
a youth symposium that we're planning on doing with Noble in empowering the youth and having a voice for them to speak out. There's a lot of things that the youth are going through mental health wise. Going to school now is stressful as it is. And you have all these mass shootings that you hear about all the time. And you can imagine it's taking a toll on the kids. So yeah, we have that lined up. And going back, Noble is a huge organization, and it is an honor for me to sit as a VP with Raj. First of all, sign me up anytime I need to work with Raj. That's a no-brainer for me.
I can tell.
But it's very inclusive, very inclusive. It speaks volumes. We have a Hispanic vice president for the Arizona chapter. So I would encourage everyone to look up Noble. It is a great organization that does really good things for the community.
I do want to just share one thing, and with that is thank you for the encouragement, for the education about Noble. And earlier this week, I had a conversation in reference to AZ Win and spoke to the president. We spoke to the president of AZ Win, and I said to her, I'm going to join. So I gave her my word. By the end of today, I'm going to join. I got home. It was late. I was almost going to sleep, and I remembered, because when you give someone your word, you should follow through. Jumped up, logged in. I'm a member. And my next step is to be a member of Noble. So I will be by the end of today, I will be a member of Noble. Yeah. And I encourage any listener to look into both of those and become active. So thank you for that encouragement.
Both of you. That's awesome. That's great to hear.
Thank you, Trish.
So Sergeant Hernandez, as we've been speaking about Noble and relationship building, can you also share from your perspective some other roles and relationships?
Yeah. So one of the things that we're doing here in the department is what's called TPM, as most of our officers are familiar with, or some of our officers are familiar with, because some have gone through the Transformational Policing Model. It stands for Transformational Policing Model. And it's a training that's being done by the department, and it's being pushed out to the line level officers. It was pushed out to supervisors, but it'll soon be pushed out to our line level officers. And it's just all the things that we're talking about. It's understanding the history, understanding the past. And in order for us to build that bridge with the community and make us all inclusive, we have to understand what happened before us. What happened before this profession was the noble profession it is now, and what was it in the past? So what is it that people have experienced, like, for example, in the South, and what experiences do they bring here when they come to Tempe to visit or to live? And as soon as our officers are aware of that, I think there'll be more, I would say that interactions with the community will be a lot smoother, because we'll understand each other. So that's one of the things that Noble is big on, is the TPM, and the department is as well. So I think it's a great thing that the training is, we're going to be getting the training for our line level officers on that.
And this ultimately comes back to the community, is what I'm hearing from you. So the benefit, the importance of it, and it makes us stronger here in the city of Tempe.
And absolutely. And people and our officers, I can understand how some officers might think it's like, oh, I don't need that because I'm not racist. I'm not like that. I don't believe in that stuff. But it'll only, is like you said, it'll only help interact with the community. And what happens when the community understands the police and vice versa, you'll have less chances of violence and you'll have less use of force encounters. And that's ultimately what we want. We're peacekeepers, we're guardians. And that's our main role, is to protect, to serve and protect.
You could say we're well balanced that way.
Mm-hmm.
Very good. Can we discuss what is redlining and how has this affected communities of color?
Sure. So redlining, man, it affects America to this day. You know, we talk about, hey, history is so important, so like you don't repeat it. But redlining actually started roughly about the 20s and 30s. You know, mostly up in the 30s when the suburban America was starting to kick out. And so, and what it did is that government institutions came together and actually mapped out where people of color, where Black Americans were going to live. And not only did they map it out where they're going to live, also mapped out where they could not go. And so that happened through across the United States, and it happened here in Arizona. So we know that there's you know, communities of color that are typically located in South Phoenix, right? And that was done through redlining. And redlining goes a little bit further than just saying, hey, where people can live, but it actually involves the financial institutions. You know, Black people and people of color were denied credit. You know, from banks. They were not allowed to receive loans on their mortgages. You could not gain equity on your mortgage. If you were able to buy a house, then you had a sky high interest rate on it that was just super high. It went so far as to, when communities were developing, that the homeowner associations were writing contracts to white people who were purchasing these homes, saying that you cannot sell your house to a person of color, period. You can't do it. And if you do, they will take away like this house from the person who purchased it, and then they will go after you civilly. And so these were contracts that were done across America. That just, okay, so not only do we have the system that was designed to, you know, keep us separate, and this is where we get segregation from, but then, you know, there was just also this punishment for white people in these communities that, like, hey, you can't sell your house to nobody that's a person of color. It actually went a little bit further, and also from zoning laws where these communities can live, but also industrial businesses, right? These industrial businesses were then zoned into these communities of color for like, just like, you know, waste, right? And so if you're a big manufacturer, well, we don't want that into this community, white community, because it's going to bring down property values. So rezone that into the Black community, rezone that into the Hispanic community, rezone that into the Native American community. And so when you look across these historical communities, I mean, you could see it. You could see some of these nuclear power plants. You could see some of these big businesses that, you know, kick off, you know, pollution and so forth. That's how it all got there. And so, you know, that's redlining, and we could see the effects of that today. And then that's kind of, you know, in my view and opinion, is like, that's how we get into this marginalization. When you say this community is marginalized, so well, what does that mean? I'm like, okay, well, so no one wants to put a business in that. You saw Jackson, Mississippi.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
You know,
yeah.
No one wants to put businesses there,
Yep.
right? And so if you don't have good businesses there because the property value is not good, or because, you know, it's environmentally challenged, then, I mean, you don't have resources and revenue and tax-based dollars going back into that community, right?
Right. Yeah, you have to have, like, we spoke to, when we were at the Telus trip, I forgot the gentleman's name, but he's a wealthy business owner there. And his main thing is in Jackson, Mississippi, is just bringing businesses in, and he's having a hard time with the bureaucracies. I mean, it's still happening now, and it's like he even said it's almost like it's reverting back to the 60s, which was very unfortunate to hear, because you don't know this stuff. So yeah, like I said, it's crazy.
So this may lead us into the next question in terms of diversity and if we can discuss what effect has diversity had on the Tempe Police Department and community relationships with the police force.
Like I said, I can go through my personal experiences. And then Raj kind of mentioned that and I saw it a lot when I was the sergeant of the gang unit. And I want to give a shout out to my detectives, some of the finest detectives ever.
Yes,
Albert,
yes.
Steve, Matt,
Yes.
Julio, Dan. They were fantastic because they understood that in order for us to enforce our laws, we have to have the community involved as well. So every time we would go and let's face facts, majority of the gangsters we face are minorities. They're minorities. So we would have to respond to a minority community, arrest either a son, a brother, a cousin, uncle, a father. And in the past, we would just take someone and leave and not explain what's going on, which could lead to that distrust. Why did the police take my son? What's going on? Well, the guys I just mentioned, like, they understood it, and they understood it as a team. We go out there and explain to the mom who might be in the yard saying, hey, what are you doing? My son, explaining what's going on. Hey, your son might have been involved in a dangerous crime and we need to take him in and we'll question him and we'll let you know what's going on. But we also gave back to the community as well, because we can't be seen as the police department can't be seen as an occupying force. Can't. We have to be able to do community involvement and community responding and community engagement. So what we would do, the team, is we would gather a lot of these like school supplies for kids and pass them out in order to build that trust with us. So that's just one example of that.
And can we talk about the importance that our department has diversity? I will share something recently. So I am assigned to the professional standards unit. Most people know that as internal affairs. I went to a meeting in another city with also other IA employees, sergeants, officers, detectives. Walked into this big room, about 40 people, and I was one of 3 women and the second person of color. I would say it was a little disappointing professionally. Personally, I could say that as well. So I did not see a whole lot of diversity in that room. And could we talk about the importance and why we need that? What does that bring to the table?
Our department does a good job of having diversity in our department. And like I'd mentioned earlier, like, we need more women in law enforcement. And I think the department is doing great strides for that. It's just we're hoping to meet a number of women joining the force. It's hard though, because it's been a predominantly male-dominated profession.
I want to jump back to what Trish said. Is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah,
yeah.
ahead, yeah.
So, like, when I walk into a room, or when I was one of 5 police officers, black police officers in Tempe at one point in time in 2000, and that was 2002. And one of the things that I questioned was the support, right? And so when you walk in and you're like the only one, you're wondering, hey, am I supporting this organization? Am I going to be treated fairly in this organization, transparently? Will there be transparency, towards me? Will I have the same opportunities? And so when just like, as I go, I mean, you just went through a training like that, man, and you were one out of 4. It's like, wow, like, okay, where's my voice? All that affects performance. All of that affects your inner morale. Like, affects so much.
And I think it's important to have these topics discussed, because what I openly will share and talk about this, and let's address this topic. And so my prior sergeant, who I shared this with, I was, as a white female and as a sergeant, I was very proud that she noticed that. And she noticed it because we have addressed this topic in conversation. So we can plant positive seeds with other people. And this way also, she had a different viewpoint, and she was able to see also through my lens and what I noticed. And so it's good for us to continue to have these open discussions. And with that diversity, and let's talk about language that we welcome here. And so you are Spanish speaking,
Yes.
and we need other languages as well.
Yes.
So can you talk about why is it important to have bilingual speaking officers on the force?
Oh, it's super important. So in the past, and some of our officers that don't speak Spanish will use the language line. They'll call a line and we'll have translation done.
And what is the language
So
line?
the language line is you grab your cell phone, there's a number you call, and they translate for you. They literally translate for you. They pass the phone back and forth. There's some apps now also that are used where you talk into it and it translates in Spanish. But if you don't speak that language, you're not completely sure if that's the right message getting across, or if you're asking where the nearest McDonald's is. You just don't know, right?
And if we have, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Go ahead.
If we have a sensitive issue to address, such as a sexual assault
absolutely.
or child molest, that becomes a little awkward,
Very
I would
awkward.
say. And
Yeah.
so what is the importance of language in reaching our community?
It's very important because that community feels involved. So, I mean, like my personal experience, I go out there, I go to, when I was an officer, I responded to a domestic violence situation with a Spanish speaking family. And right off the bat, they're experiencing some traumatic event, and no one really wants the police to be there, right? But we're called to solve issues. So you already have that going against the officers showing up. Now, with me showing up and able to speak that language, it immediately lightens the room up. There's less chances for violence against us police officers. There's less chances of use of force, and it's because as human beings, we want to be understood and listened to. So that's why it's super important to have Spanish-speaking officers and other speaking officers. We have officers that speak. Currently, we have an officer that speaks Mandarin. I'm not sure we have any Farsi, but we have a very big Persian community here in Tempe also. Like I mentioned, the Mandarin, but there's other languages that we need. Tagalog, the Filipino language. When you respond to calls for service with people of those communities, they lighten up immediately when you have someone speaking to them. And even though you may arrest somebody, you're going to have kids there. And they see that, hey, look, there's Officer Hernandez. He speaks Spanish. I could be like him one day. And it's kind of like we're like almost like a symbol of hope in situations like this, especially for these communities that may not feel they have that hope. And being immigrants coming to a country that's new, and they may not even have a trust of the police from their own personal experiences back home. So I think it's vital in order for us to actually bridge that divide between the community and include people, is having officers that speak those languages to kind of include everybody and make we're all one community. So it's super important.
And on the topic of diversity, how has this had an impact, or how has this affected you personally, or do you have a story that you could share with us?
Yes, being in this profession, one of the biggest highlight is just how important diversity is just a representation to the community. And it always makes my day when someone, a Black American, sees me in uniform and just gives me that nod, that certain nod that glad you're there, or a family. I remember being at a restaurant, and especially during the heightened when civil unrest was going on, and there's some uncertainties of why I'm in this profession, And as I was eating with my peers, I could see her grab her child, and she was Black American, and she grabbed her child and she lifted him up, and so he could see me, so me and the child could make eye contact, and she waved and I waved, like I was crying on the inside, just completely crying.
Yeah,
but
you got my eyes watered. Yeah,
that's just so important to me. That I connect with that. It reminds me why I'm in this profession. They know that there's somebody that's in this profession that's for them. That's is about a positive change in this organization. So it hits me home. Just here, maybe about a month ago, just down on Mill Avenue, I had a group of young adults, which is like really cool. Just come over and give me dap, give me knuckles, punches, and actually say, hey, thank you for being a police officer. We need more, men like you, more men of color like you in this profession. So I love it.
Oh, that's awesome. Thank you for sharing
that's fantastic. It's that symbol of hope that
it is.
I also have an experience.
Please.
Also, this happened years ago, probably 12 years ago. And I was like almost like a brand new rookie cop, a year or two on maybe. But there was an experience where I was, I forgot what the call for service was. And it was so long ago, but I contacted it was like a teenage, young adult, and this guy was from Venezuela, and he didn't speak any English at all. He just spoke Spanish. So I contacted him, and he immediately, I didn't give him any verbal commands. He sat down, and he just put his hands up, and then he I thought his behavior was weird, because I had never seen that before. And he reached for his wallet, and he was looking for his wallet and was about to pull some money out. And in Spanish, I asked him, "Hey, what are you doing?" He's like, "I'm about to like pay you. How much do you need?" And I'm like, "What are you talking about?" And then he told me about his experience back home. And when police contact you, you're expected to give them what they call a tax. A mordida in Spanish, it's called a tax. And then he was expected to give that to me, but I told him, like, we don't do that here. Like, this is a land of the free, home of the brave. We don't do that, right? So for him, that was a positive interaction with a Hispanic officer, and knowing that, hey, the police here are actually good. And I'm hoping that message was spread across to his family and friends.
Yes.
And I think that was a funny experience, but also could be seen as like, hey, that was hopeful, in that maybe that he spread the word to his family and friends.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And as we are coming to the end of our conversation, I'm just going to openly ask this. If we could discuss, what are some major points that you would want the general public to take away from this conversation?
I think police departments are really just a part of the community, right? And I think the public has a charge to want to know how their police department is doing, want to know what type of training that their officers are involved in, what's the leadership structure looks like, what the diversity of your police department, what does that look like? I think that's important, and I would want the public to be involved, be engaged with your police departments. I one of the things I love at Tempe Police Department is that we're not a department where we shy away from tough conversations. And this department will stand in it, and we've been standing in it for the last 2 years here, just in recent. And so and we're okay with that. And I think the hard conversations with your police department are good. They're healthy. It's involved with holding us accountable, right? And so and we need that. But also too to understand, to provide grace, because we're not going to be perfect, and when we go out there and we are trying to fulfill these roles, officers are carrying a lot. And oftentimes, with the average officer, we just don't have time to deal with the trauma that we're holding on to. There's things that we just don't talk about, and we still have our personal lives. And when we go out there and we make a mistake, okay, cool. Just have some grace, and we, and if we need to be held accountable for that mistake, absolutely. But just understand that, hey, there's stuff that we're carrying, and just give us grace and work with us, because we'll get to the right point.
And to add to what the LT had said is, like, when people see us, they see the uniform, they see the badge, they see a symbol, right? But we're just people. Like, if people got to talk to us and look past the badge and the uniform, we would get along a lot more, I believe, because we would have topics that we have similarity likings on, and we just talk about sports or movies or current events. But I would say that for the community to know that we're people. We're people first, and this is our profession, and we hold it in high regard. And we will be as professional as possible, and know, like, hey, I'm a goofball. I'll joke around with you if you want, and then we can make this a lot easier. And it's been very successful for me. And I think that the officers on the street that are just themselves are very successful in that as well. So I hope the community realizes that, and they see the best in us and just who we are.
Well said.
I agree. Thank you.
Yeah, well
thank
said.
you for this powerful conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thank you very much, Trish.
Thank you. Thanks for having us here.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you, E. This has been an honor to sit with you, man.
You too, sir. Appreciate it. Thanks, Raj.
All the time.
It's good times.